Happening today, President Donald Trump and the Department of Homeland Security will hold a briefing on efforts to allegedly secure U.S. elections.
So this comes directly after a primetime address. The president made accusations about attempts for foreign interference in elections. Your reporter Jen Sullivan breaking down that speech and the reaction to the president's claims.
Good evening.
President Donald Trump delivering a primetime address Thursday, claiming there are, quote, shocking vulnerabilities in our election infrastructure.
Tonight, we're publishing a series of previously classified U.S. intelligence community assessments and other reports proving that our government has long known these machines are extremely exposed to attack.
Still, Trump has not provided evidence that machines have been exploited by a foreign adversary. He also accused China of meddling in the 2020 election, but Trump did not elaborate on how it may have impacted the results of the election.
China engaged in other election-related activities to undermine my first administration and our 2020 campaign.
Trump has repeatedly claimed the election was rigged and that he won in 2020 instead of former President Joe Biden. Those claims have repeatedly been proven false. The U.S. intelligence community released a report in 2021 that said China did not interfere, specifically saying China, quote, considered but did not deploy influence efforts intended to change the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. And the states who were accused of election fraud say every precaution is taken to ensure results are honest and authentic.
This is why we have paper ballots. It's why we do pre-election tests, and then we do post-election hand count audits to make sure that the machines read the ovals correctly.
Thursday's speech comes just months ahead of the critical midterm elections, where Republicans could lose the majority in either the Senate, the House, or both. Many Democrats say these latest claims just spread more lies.
We have seen so many examples of this president's craziness when it comes to the 2020 election.
Trump's remarks come on the heels of his so-called Save America Act failing to pass in the Senate. The legislation would enact strict new ID and proof of citizenship requirement for voting. I'm Jen Sullivan reporting.
Well, the president's speech drawing pushback from leaders here in Connecticut. Governor Ned Lamont posting online saying, quote, President Trump once again used his platform to undermine Americans' faith in our democracy to serve his own own political interests. The governor went on to say that elections here in Connecticut are safe, secure, and accessible.